This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. Today we have a very big show. We are wrapping up the Toronto International Film Festival, and we have some great guests today. Joining the show is Jeff Ballmer, one half of the Classic Movies Live podcast, who contributed so much coverage of TIFF. He was heard on the last episode where we previewed the festival and has written plenty of reviews, including Paying for It, The Return, Vice is Broke, and more that can all be found in the show notes and on ContraZoomPod.com. Also joining us today is Thomas Stoneham Judge, the owner of the film-based publication For Real, and Darren Zakis, who writes under the name Darren's Movie Reviews and whose work can be found at Movie Scene Canada. Both Thomas and Darren are also members of the Cascadian Film and Television Critics Association. Welcome to the show, Jeff, Thomas, and Darren.
What's up, everyone?
Hey, glad to be back.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, very excited. I probably should have written down the last time I had Thomas and Darren down, and now I'm forgetting when you both were last on the show. Thomas, I think it was for Seattle when we talked about Seth.
Yes, that's right. We did that.
And this is my first
Is
time.
it? Oh my God, I can't believe it.
I know, yeah.
It's been like
Hard
2
to imagine.
years. I'm so sorry, Darren. This is a big oversight on me.
Yeah, it's all good.
Well, thank you for joining.
To make it up, just make sure this episode is as wild as the substance.
So what we're going to do today is we each decided to bring 2 films forward that we want to talk about. We'll each sort of share our thoughts on it for those of us that have seen it. And to start things off, though, I'd love to kind of hear about everyone's TIFF experience and how it was for them this year. Jeff, we'll start with you. How many movies did you see? Do you have any, maybe some highlights, lowlights, stuff that you can kind of talk about in vague terms? Just in general, what your thoughts were on the festival this year.
Well, my ranked list on Letterboxd has 45 movies on it, and on the ground I saw 40. So I was, because I was press, I got to see 5 before the festival started. So that was pretty nice. So I saw 45 movies altogether at TIFF. It was a lot of running around. I was working during the same time. So very busy days. I haven't seen a lot of my friends in like 2 weeks.
Nice. Yeah, I think maybe the only person that might rival you for the amount of movies you saw is Darren. Darren, you saw something about similar to that, didn't you?
I was 45 movies, a couple before going there, but I actually saw 46 screenings since I caught the People's Choice winner repeat screening. So
wow.
Yeah, but I wasn't working during the time, so I don't know how you did that, Jeff. I was struggling with that alone.
I mean, I didn't have a choice. I teach, so it's the beginning of the school year. I can't really get away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Field trip to TIFF.
Yeah.
I wish.
We're doing a week-long field trip to King Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess if you were to do a field trip to TIFF, what film do you think would be most appropriate for the subjects that you do teach? I'd be very curious about if you have an answer for that, if you saw one that maybe would have some tangential overlap.
Oh gosh, that is a really tough question that I was not prepared for. I teach a problem solving and logic course, so like it's first year computer science, and then I teach a project management course. And I guess for the project management course, maybe Vice is Broke.
Okay.
Because that, it's all about a project being managed from start to finish. You can kind of abstract it to be like that. For the problem solving and logic course, I am not sure. There's got to be something, but I'm not sure if like anything that I saw really fits there specifically. It's not necessarily a course based too heavily around art. And the movies that I like to see are, weird art. I don't necessarily go for I don't look for logic in my movies. When it's there, it's fine, but it's not what I look for.
Fair enough. And then Thomas, what about...
You know what? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, what about you? How was your TIFF?
You know what I'm gonna. So this is something I actively thought about as I was watching a couple of the films, because I don't know how it is in Canada, but like I think it's like middle school, elementary school, not elementary school, the middle school, early high school. They do this. They have a home ec class where they show The Miracle of Life, to like explain to kids what going through the birth process and everything is about. And I'm thinking like, look, let's replace the Miracle of Life with things like Night Bitch and The Assessment. Like that's what really prepares you for parenthood and adulthood and having kids. Okay, so like let's be more real about that. But
I can see it.
sorry, to answer your question, it was a very busy fest for me as well. I didn't do nearly 45. I think I logged 35 films in total. But I also kind of bounced around between red carpets. I did some one-on-one interviews, which I've been publishing. And so it's kind of a multifaceted festival for me. I don't just go for screenings. I have a lot of other priorities that I try to get to, including meeting up with my friends who do the same thing that we do. And so it's always nice. TIFF is a great hub for a lot of our film critic friends to meet up, and so I try to make sure I make the most of that while we're all in town. So, thanks to everyone who met up with me and had conversations with me, and yeah, that's always one of the highlights of going to these festivals.
Yeah, it's definitely really fun being able to just see so many people, whether it's not like you know them or you just know them through online, and be like, it's nice to kind of finally put like a face to a name sort of thing. We've had enough interactions online. It's really cool to finally meet you, even if it's a very brief interaction, where it's very interesting seeing people around town where we're all in one place. And it feels like it's the only festival that really does that, because I don't know, maybe it's because they have so many press, and it's just so much easier for us to get to Toronto compared to maybe something like Sundance or Cannes or wherever else around the world. The access level is a lot easier for us, which is great. Darren, I know you've been going to TIFF for a few years now. What year is this for you?
This was my third year in person.
In person? Okay.
Yeah, because I did 2 years online during the pandemic.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And where do you rank it in terms of film festivals that you've been attending?
Of like film festivals overall,
Yeah.
like I've only done TIFF, Vancouver, and Sundance. So TIFF is definitely the winner because Vancouver is very small scale and Sundance is its own special beast, and I will say no more.
Thomas knows exactly what you're talking about.
Anyone who goes to Sundance feels that.
Yeah. But no, it was a good one. And in terms of years, it was probably, of the 3 in-person years I've been, the best one, because it felt like the festival is truly fully up and operating at 100% with, celebrities, red carpets, parties, critics everywhere, and just a happening place for a week and a half.
Yeah. Now, I don't know, just because this was my first time attending in person in like 5 or 6 years, but it truly felt like it was one of the most stacked lineups I've ever seen at a festival. It was incredible, the amount of films that I wanted to see, and like, judging by the amount of films that the 3 of you all saw, I feel like you kind of agree with that assessment, that it was a very strong year.
Oh yeah, very strong year. Yeah.
I got to the point where I saw 40 movies, and I got to the point where I was like trying to find time for other ones, but I physically could not. Like I didn't get to see everything I wanted to see at TIFF because it would have been impossible. There were too many movies that I was interested in there this year.
I remember when the early announcements happened, and I was like, wow, the early announcements, like, that's the festival. Like, these are the ones I'm going to see. And then the full lineup came out, and everything I thought was top priorities in the early announcements suddenly became like mid-tier priorities, which didn't like diminish how much I wanted to see them. It just, there were even more movies that I wanted to see, even more than the films that I thought I really wanted to see. So when the final schedule came out, I was just looking at it like, this is great. We're eating good this year.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let us talk a bit about the award winners, because that does have a big effect on how the rest of the movie season sort of goes. And by now, I'm sure everyone knows The Life of Chuck was the winner of the People's Choice Award. We are going to get more in depth into that very shortly. But the runners-up were Amelia Perez and Anora. We were going to talk about Anora, but I believe it was you, Darren, who graciously decided to push that to the side. Or was it you, Thomas? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was
It
me.
was you?
I
Okay.
look forward to having a conversation about that either during or after VIFF.
Yeah, I have not seen it yet, and I already have my tickets secured for VIFF, so that will definitely be a VIFF topic, and we'll have you back on for that, Thomas, and then you can share your thoughts on it there as well. But yeah, those are the big winners there. But then we also had the Tragically Hypno Dress Rehearsal, which won the People's Choice Documentary, The Substance, which won the Midnight Madness Award, which we are also going to be talking about, with the runners-up being Dead Talent Society and Friendship, two movies that I did not see, so I cannot speak to them at all. The Platform Award went to They Will Be Dust. And then what are some other big ones? Oh, yeah, the Best Canadian Feature Award went to Shepherds, and the Best Canadian Discovery Award went to Universal Language, a movie I really adored. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the different award winners, with sort of saving maybe more in-depth thoughts on the life of Chuck and The Substance for when we get to them. So Jeff, I'll start with you. What were your sort of thoughts on the big award winners?
I was frankly a little bit surprised that Friendship didn't actually just take the Midnight Madness Award. Like, it makes sense that Substance got it because probably way more people saw the Substance. But I went to see Friendship the first night, and like, that is, I don't think there was like a minute where the entire theater wasn't in like raucous laughter. That was, and over the next couple of days, like, I heard so much about the Friendship afterwards. I was like, there's no way that this can lose. And so I definitely appreciate seeing it in those top three. I was a little surprised it was number three. That's one that I talk a little bit about on my TIFF wrap up podcast, which I won't push too much more in this episode, but we did talk about it a little bit there. Um, and beyond that, the People's Choice Award winners. Well, we'll get into the life of Chuck, so I won't say too much. But I was very happy to see that one there. I was, I guess, a little surprised to see Emilia Perez there, just because of my personal reaction to it. But also, that seems like one that it's interesting. That's going to be a polarizing one as it finally comes out on Netflix and more people get to see it. Everyone that I've talked to who's seen it either really hates it or really, really loves it. I've found I don't think I've seen a single person yet who's like, it was okay. Like, people have extreme reactions to that movie. So I'm excited to talk about that one. Like, I'm excited to talk about that one with people as people can sort of see it on Netflix in the next 3 weeks, I think.
Fair. Thomas, are you disappointed that Honora did not win the People's Choice, or was that something that you maybe expected?
We are going to talk more about Honora during VIFF. I am, proud of Sean Baker for getting the Palme d'Or for that film. It obviously has a lot of hype, and I. It's not that I didn't like it, but we'll talk more about that during VIFF. I don't know. I'm kind of indifferent about this list. I didn't see Life of Chuck, so I can't weigh in on that as the win. Emilia Perez is very interesting as a first runner-up, especially ahead of Honora. I don't know how that mathed, but it's. I mean, they even added a screening for Honora. I can't remember if Emilia Perez had a screening added, but there was a
It did
Friday.
too. Yeah.
It did too. Yeah.
Saturday
And
So
Emilia
morning.
I
Perez
mean,
already had more screenings as
yeah,
well.
yeah. I guess that's true. So I don't know. I don't know. I had a different People's Choice winner in mind that actually would have been a better candidate for being a Best Picture nominee. So I was really looking towards Saturday Night for winning People's Choice, and we'll talk more about that later on. And The Substance, winning Midnight Madness, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't see the other ones. Yeah, a lot of these movies that are on this list I did not see at the festival. These are just all films that kind of that I hope are things obviously people liked. But yeah, I personally probably would have had different lists. The particular one that I probably would be more inclined to change. I didn't see They Will Be Dust, but for the platform prize, I might have given that to Victor, the documentary by Olivier Sarbel. Um, that's just such a it was such a incredible documentary experience. Like, you don't get documentaries like that to be so dramatic and cinematic and so well executed. But anyway, that's my plug for Victor. If you haven't seen it, I think it's going to the Hamptons International Film Festival soon. So, yeah, I guess everything else we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, fair enough. And Darren, what about you?
So apart from the Substance of Life of Chuck, I didn't see any of the winners, so can't really comment on them. But I'm excited to check out Universal Language for VIFF. That's on my list now after it won and hearing rave reviews from everyone who saw it. The Substance, I'm not surprised. Typically, it's always the Midnight Madness opener that wins it. It's always their biggest film. It's got the most screenings, so The Substance checked out there. I wanted to see Friendship, but it was impossible to get a ticket to, so sadly we'll have to wait for that one. But it's coming with A24 now, so it should be coming soon enough and be easy to see. And for The Life of Chuck, that was my favorite of the festival. And I remember walking out of that premiere, just looking at some of the other press who were there, and we all kind of looked at each other and went, is this our People's Choice winner? So I was very happy to see that come out on top. I'll speak more about that one later. But Anora, I'm shocked it actually did place at TIFF. I thought it was going to just miss it. So when it came in third, I'm like, okay, the Oscar run is still potentially alive for that movie. Emilia Perez was a happy surprise. I was in the group that absolutely loved it, but I wasn't expecting that one. I was expecting to see something like Saturday Night or even The Wild Robot there, but can't complain.
Yeah, The Wild Robot definitely seemed to have a lot of groundswell movement behind it. I was quite surprised that it didn't end up placing. People were honestly expecting maybe to even challenge for the People's Choice Award.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about The Wild Robot, and I think that I was also maybe kind of a part of this, is that I think The Wild Robot, with it coming out very soon after the festival, people deprioritized it early in the fest. And I certainly didn't get to it till the last day, and a lot of people that I know who saw it didn't get to it until like the last day or the last weekend. And I think that there was this kind of this incredible surge of word of mouth that then for people who were there for the second weekend then finally checked it out, and that's when the buzz really exploded a little bit too late for voting for the award. Which is unfortunate because that movie is, I just love that film. So
yes.
What was pretty funny about The Wild Robot, though, I didn't get to see it. I was one of the people who deprioritized it for exactly the reason you said. But what was kind of funny about it is that was the movie with the most screenings announced before the festival. I think it might have actually gotten one or two added, too. I can't remember for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
But before the festival, that was the only movie that came with 10 screenings announced. So there was a running joke between me and a few of my friends that we were just going to use all of our 10 tickets on The Wild Robot, and we were going to meet at every single screening.
And you would be right to do so.
Yeah.
To be
Apparently,
fair,
apparently it was good enough
Incredible.
to do
Yeah.
it's super good. Yeah. I mean, my joke was that, oh, look, it's theatrically releasing in Toronto. Like they just literally had multiple screenings almost every day for that movie.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's a bigger opening than some Canadian movies will get too.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really adored Universal Language. I'm so happy that it got selected to be Canada's entry at the Oscars for Best International Film. Jeff wrote a terrific review about it for the website that I'm going to plug here. I was just blown away with how heartwarming and what a world that Matthew Rankin has created. And I hope it does get an Oscar nomination because I think it's a type of movie that people are really going to discover and fall in love with and sort of appreciate the unique Canadianness to it all.
And it's already broken Canada's streak of nominating weird documentaries no one's watched. So that's, a good, I like that. And I hope that Canada keeps nominating stuff like that or submitting stuff like that than these weird documentaries no one sees. Maybe I shouldn't be so mean to them, but I didn't see them either, so I'm part of the problem, I guess.
Well, I mean, I saw Eternal Spring and didn't care for that, and I didn't see the one last year, so I can't really comment on that one either. Whatever that documentary was, I don't remember. But yeah, so those are the big award winners. We've teased it enough, so I think it's time we kind of get into the movies that we're going to be talking about. As I said, we each decided to bring 2 movies to the table. The first one is going to be Jeff, and before you jump into The Life of Chuck, I do want to say that for 12 straight years, the winner of the People's Choice has been nominated for Best Picture in 15 of the last 16, where in 2011, the only time it didn't happen in recent years was Where Do We Go Now won, and A Separation was the runner-up, which still ended up having an Oscar win for Best International Film. So yeah, Life of Chuck has some great pedigree behind it now, with the big huge caveat of there's no distributor yet. No one has purchased this movie, which is absolutely mind-boggling. Don't know what's going on, but Jeff, please tell us more about this movie and your thoughts, and then open it up to the group.
All right, so The Life of Chuck, I guess just to synopsize it right away, The Life of Chuck tells the life story of Chuck. I guess that's kind of right in the title, but it tells the life story of Chuck, who is an accountant, and it tells it in reverse. And like it really commits to that in reverse. The very first thing that you see on screen is Act 3. So it tells it in 3 acts, goes in reverse. And when we meet Chuck, it's through a sequence involving people who have never met him, as they come to terms with the end of the world. So as the movie is starting, the world is like completely ending, including things like California sinking into the ocean, the stars literally like going out in the sky. And one of the things that everyone starts to see as the world is sort of ending is they start seeing billboards and ads for congratulating Chuck on 39 great years. So nobody knows who Charles Krantz is, but they all know that he's retiring, I guess, after 39 great years. And he must have been great for his company because they're paying to set up all of this advertisement for him. So, yeah, what I wrote here for the end of the synopsis, it seems that Chuck is retiring, but no one knows who he is or why the seemingly modest accountant is so important. And so that first that first act sort of it's like a whole story without Chuck, and then after that it just it goes backwards and sort of focuses on key moments from Chuck's life. And I think what's really beautiful about this movie, I'll open it up in just a minute, but I think what's really beautiful about this movie is it sort of gives this complete picture of a person without in like a format that you don't necessarily expect. If I'm thinking about an entire person's life and I want to write down like a biography of this person, I'm going to start at the birth, and then I'm going to go through all of the societally major events that person's life entails, and then maybe arrive at their death. But this, like, the major events that it goes through, the big things it decides to depict are like a time when he was walking through a town while he was there for a conference, and decided to stop at a busker and where there was a busker and just start dancing for a bit. Or early on, like some conversations he had with his grandpa when he was 12. Like, it focuses a lot on those little moments and how those little moments can be, the most important moments of someone's life. And how, like, this person who is just an accountant, like, he's not, the world at large wouldn't normally care that much about Chuck, but he is this complete person, and it paints this really beautiful picture of, I guess, an ordinary life, but it kind of shows it as something a little more than that, a little more extraordinary.
Nice. Well, this was a movie that I did not see, so I cannot actually comment on this. But did both of you see it, Darren and Thomas, or did...
I saw it.
Okay.
I don't think Thomas did.
I did not see it, and so I had Jeff on mute that whole explanation, and I was just waiting to see someone else motion their mouth, so I know that we're done. I like to go into films as blindly as possible, and I'm sure he gave a great description about the film. But the reason I didn't see it was because 3 of my writers covered the film, which was incredible because they had their reviews published. Like, I got their reviews online before the announcement, and so once it was announced that it won, I'm like, we have it. don't know what I can say. We have a ton of content on this. Let me get that shared on social media.
We're on video, but people won't be able to see video. That was Thomas miming typing, which was
yes,
forgetting
miming
to
typing,
word.
like get that reshared, send. Yeah, so it was really, I really applaud my team for really calling it. Like they were so like nobody actually said like, oh, this is going to be the winner, but they were so enamored with the film that all three of them got their reviews to me as soon as possible, and I got those online as soon as I could, so that when that Sunday came around and it was announced as the winner, we had content to capitalize on, which was awesome. So thank you, team. I look forward to seeing it sometime. I wish that I had time to catch the People's Choice screenings, but those were very hard to get tickets to, and I also had a flight to catch that day. One of these days I'll get to it when someone decides to buy it and distribute it.
It's coming. There has to be a massive bidding war going on behind the scenes, because at first you're like, oh, it's going to be, a cute streaming movie that everyone's going to fall in love with, but once it won People's Choice, it's like, oh no, there's a serious awards push here.
Yeah, and I think that's my thinking. Okay, like I said, I haven't seen the film, but just kind of looking at my experience with how award season rolls out, like this is because it won People's Choice, it's obviously going to try to go to a studio or distributor that's going to give it a proper Oscar push and a proper awards push. And so I've just been like theorizing, like who would do that, which studio would be best for that. And I'm sure that that's what the negotiations are right now, is who will push this hardest for Academy Awards.
Any other thoughts on it, Darren?
I absolutely loved it. I found that, just focusing on these smaller moments in someone's life, not, necessarily the biggest moments, but the ones that kind of formed them as an individual the most, was absolutely moving. I was quite moved by the end that I was, a puddle of tears. And there was one scene, I won't say the scene, but it was last year's version of Hitman where it got massive applause mid-movie, just a fun, energetic moment. And in terms of Mike Flanagan, who's best known for all his horror stuff, this was such a deviation from the normal genre he's in, but still had that same sincere and people-based storytelling that's made his work so beloved within the horror genre. So it was a really logical jump for him to make this movie.
I wrote down a bunch of stuff that I want to talk about, but I'm very worried that it is going to be spoilery.
I know.
And, I'm not going to do that, and I'm now even more worried because I know that Thomas doesn't want even very light spoilers. But I guess what I will say,
mute you.
That's okay.
Take 5.
You know what? Please, I'm going to encourage you now to mute. It will be very light spoilers, if at all. But I want to say, especially when we're talking about awards, I think that Mark Hamill has like one of probably, certainly the best monologue I've seen in a movie this year, and one of just the best. Just an incredible performance. I don't think I've ever seen him in something that I've liked as much as this in terms of his performance. It is just an absolutely crushing monologue that I've been thinking about since I heard it. One other thing here. What did I write down? I don't know. I don't know what else I'm trying to look at here. I think it was mostly that. I wanted to say that Mark Hamill gives an incredible performance, and I think that if it comes to awards, that is probably that's the one that I would push the most. I think it's sort of an interesting case where this movie doesn't really have a lead actor. So I don't know. Tom Hiddleston is on the poster, but like he's not even in the movie. It's so weird.
He's got the smallest amount of screen time? Like, it's
really?
Not much.
Wow. That's something I was curious about.
Jacob Tremblay has very slightly less.
Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. Yeah, because the way you were describing it, where you're saying he was barely in the third act or not in the third act, I was like, so how big of a part does Tom Hiddleston have? Because I know Jacob Tremblay plays the younger version of him. So, yeah, that's a very interesting.
Well, Jacob Tremblay plays a younger version of him.
Okay.
There is an even younger version of him that has more screen time. Jacob Tremblay is in like one scene.
There's 3 young Chucks. Yeah, Jacob Tremblay's got like the 5 minutes worth. Yeah.
Okay.
He gets to be there for one of the most moving moments.
Yeah.
But like again, he's there for minutes.
So then, basically, what I want to know is, will The Life of Chuck, if it eventually gets a distributor, be a Best Picture player?
I think
I
it's
mean,
got picture. Like it's a crowd pleaser. It's moving. It's kind of got what you like for a good one. Like I think back to like Green Book and those types of ones where it's, not necessarily the, awards acting juggernauts, but it's one that everyone can get behind. And with that, I think the adapted screenplay nomination will go hand in hand with that. And then you've got Mark Hamill for supporting. I don't know how much more it has. Like Mike Flanagan could sneak into director. There could be a score or an editing or, a below the line one. But I
Yeah,
think
guys.
in acting, it's not really a player outside of Hamill.
Interesting.
So I'm gonna throw a hot take out there, and I think this is one that misses this Oscars this year. I see it more on the Hitman track where I don't know. I wonder if it would go to Sundance, maybe South by Southwest, maybe, and then have a summer release next year for move it out of the really popular holiday season, trying to get that award and move it more into a time when it can make the most money.
It's possible. I see it as a perfect Christmas Day movie because there's nothing really happy coming out on Christmas Day. We have Nosferatu and Baby Girl, two incredibly dark films. This is the perfect counter programming that you could take the entire family to for that type of Oscar film. But
You did mention that, and there's something
yeah,
to that. I mean, I don't. It's a really great strategy, and I wonder. I'm confident that that's on the table. But I also wonder why it's taking so long. If it was such an obvious choice, what is taking so long? Hitman was sold pretty quickly, and yeah, I just I don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen it, so I can't really speak on what if it does fit that Academy Award space. Um, but I don't know. I think it could just be a good blockbuster. But anyway, that's my hot take.
some behind the scenes notes, especially on like what you were just saying. Hitman sold very quickly to Netflix. I
yeah,
think that Netflix and Mike Flanagan may not be on great terms.
No.
Right.
Uh,
no,
Beyond that, Hitman did not get PCA, which I think gives this a lot of like extra power in that space. And while I mostly agree with Darren in terms of like how this could play and like this being a really good Christmas movie, can you remind me, Dakota, what was the last movie that you mentioned? I think it was the last People's Choice Awards winner to have no distribution.
Oh, to have no distribution? Oh, I don't know.
It was the one that you were talking about, the last one to miss the
To Best Picture?
Best Picture.
Oh, Where Do We Go Now? The Nadine Labaka
That
film.
Yeah, that one did not have distribution going into the festival and won People's Choice. This one did not have distribution going in. This is actually, if we're going just on trends, this would be, that one also missed Best Picture. That's what I'm trying to say. That one also missed Best Picture. This is actually, I don't know how closely this mirrors everything related to that one, but that is a similarity. So it could miss Best Picture. Although I hope it doesn't. And I think I agree with Darren on its specific awards chances.
All right. Well, I think we should move on to our next film, which is the Midnight Madness winner, which is The Substance, which is a new film directed by Coralie Farge, and it stars Demi Moore, Margaret Qualley, and Dennis Quaid, and it is about a woman played by Demi Moore who is sort of an aging celebrity. She has a sort of like a Jane Fonda type workout TV show, and Dennis Quaid, the TV executive, decides that he wants to have a younger and hotter host, so they fire Demi Moore, and she finds out that there is a new medical how to say this procedure that
experiment.
a new medical experiment that you can go through where you take the substance and it turns you into a second person where another body is created, but it's not two different people. It's not a doppelganger. You are inhabiting the consciousness of both bodies. The only thing is, you can only be in this body for 1 week at a time, and then you have to switch back to your other body. So it's 1 week on, 1 week off. And of course, soon as you describe that and you know that it's a body horror, you understand that things inevitably go wrong because they do not adhere to the 1 week policy. And you have basically the two versions of Demi Moore, with the other one being Margaret Qualley, sort of having this internal, external struggle against each other. This is a movie that, like, the more I try to describe it, the more complicated it's going to sound. It's one of those things where, like, you get 5 minutes of, backstory. You understand exactly what's going on in this movie, but the more I try to describe it, the more complicated it's going to sound. But basically, this is a very, very grotesque, over-the-top body horror comedy that is sort of an indictment on not necessarily just the way Hollywood treats women, but sort of in general, women who feel who have this imposing beauty standards put upon them and are not allowed to age gracefully or not allowed to be comfortable in their own bodies at the age or feel beautiful and things like that. And they sort of maybe self-sabotage, both based on how they feel and also how the world sort of treats them. And because of that, what better way than have four guys talk about a woman's experience aging? I feel like that's only fair.
Thank you, Dakota, for pointing that out.
in case this wasn't very obvious, but this is body horror. I would say it's very minimal on the horror side, very high on the body side. This might be the grossest, most over-the-top, ridiculous movie I have ever seen. So much so, there's a moment in it where, like, I don't know if I want to say it or not, but there was towards the end when the final evolution happens, and there was a woman behind me that just screamed out a single word based on something that was falling off of this creature. So if you've seen this movie by now, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I had so much fun with this movie. This is one of those movies where you watch the audience recoil and laugh in unison, and it makes this experience so great. This movie is now in theaters, and everyone that's seen it in theaters so far has sort of had a similar experience. Thomas, you had just watched it the night before recording this, so you can sort of attest to this as well. But yeah, please, you're fresh with this, so please share your thoughts. You said you had some thoughts.
This movie, I lost my mind over this movie. I'm not very gravitated to body horror. The grotesqueness, the over the topness, it's not something that I naturally gravitate to. And that's not necessarily the reason that it took me so long to see it. This was another one that I deprioritized at TIFF because it comes out so soon after the fest. So I did see it last night. And I there's a part of me that is bummed I missed it at the fest because I'm confident that audience would have been fantastic to see it with. My theater had 5 people in it, which is not the most ideal situation to watch the movie in, but I still had a great time with it. In fact, because there were so few people, it gave me more agency to laugh louder and to react stronger, because there is so much to react to with this film. But I think what really surprised me about it is how well it held my attention. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes long, which is kind of long for a horror film, a body horror film. And I just think that it did such a great job of keeping you engaged. It is a bit convoluted when it comes to, like, not convoluted, but like the setup is a bit complex, and there's a lot of groundwork it has to lay. But it does such a great job keeping it entertaining while laying that groundwork, and just beautifully sets it up for that last 20-25 minutes of the film that I lit jaw to the floor the whole time. I took edge of your seat literally. I am just like literally leaning over the guardrail, trying not to fall out of my seat on how absurd this movie gets. But it's great. It's great. And honestly, we're talking about award winners. I'm glad that it won Midnight Madness at TIFF, but it just bothers me that this is not a film that's going to be in award season conversation, because I see this for Best Picture. I see this for Best Director. I see Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Original Screenplay. Like, this should be in multiple above the line categories, but because of the genre that it is, it just won't be, and that is just a crime against cinema. This movie's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it manages to somehow sneak into like best hair and makeup, I think that would be the win upon all wins, that it could just being nominated there.
If it
Yeah,
gets
look-
nominated, it's winning that category. It is the best of the year. The struggle is to get past the horror bias.
Yeah. I mean,
Get in.
even just the yellow coat was enough for best costume
Oh.
design. Okay.
Yes.
Just the yellow coat is enough for me to give it best costume design. So like, there's technicals that I think it's good for, but like you guys are saying, if it gets nominated for anything, that's probably a win for it, because it deserves to be there. But man, I wish it could contend in those above the line categories, because it should. It definitely deserves that.
I mean, does it mean anything that it won screenplay? It can, because like that's not
It did.
nothing, right?
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be really fantastic, and I think there's already a bit of grassroots support behind Demi Moore here. She is an iconic actress who's never really had a role sort of like this, and she does a great job. The fact that she's willing to sort of confront her own aging and celebrity status and what it meant to be a sex symbol, and now that I believe she's 61, doesn't have that same designation placed upon her. I think I hate calling performances brave, but like, anytime that you're willing to kind of put your entire reputation and image on the line to do something like this, you sort of just have to applaud. And then Darren, what about you? What was your theatrical experience of seeing this?
So I saw it at Midnight Madness at TIFF, and the crowd was going absolutely wild for it. There was screaming, people crying out as the gross stuff was happening, uncontrollable laughter. I was a little worried because it was a midnight movie. It started about 12:30, so really late getting us in. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to struggle staying awake. Not a problem at all. It was true madness. And the movie itself was, I love how aggressively in your face it was. The sound design was blowing you to the back of your seat, even though you wanted to be on the edge. The social commentary on aging and, how society in this movie, specifically Hollywood, treats older women was a little too on the nose, especially with Dennis Quaid's character being named Harvey.
Being named Harvey. I lost my mind on that.
Yeah.
They said Harvey wants you. I said, you are kidding.
And they say it so late, and you're like, wait, his name's Harvey? You're like, this checks out, because the guy is just a monster. Like, there's some really gross body horror stuff that goes on in that movie, but the most disturbing scene might still be the shrimp scene at the beginning with Dennis Quaid just munching on them, and
Yeah, you won't look at shrimp or roasted chicken the same way ever again.
Oh God, the chicken.
Oh, chicken. Oh no.
Yes.
I was gonna say, like, you saying this is one of the grossest movies you've ever seen. Like, it's not. I think people should understand that's not because of the body horror. At least when I watched it, it's not gross body horror in my opinion. It's gross eating shrimp. Like that is, it's dastardly. Like I loved that scene. It creeped me out so much. And the way that I mean, that's the biggest example of that. But I love the cinematography in this. Just the way that I don't know if you guys have seen Coralie Farge's other movie, Revenge.
Oh.
But the way that she focuses in on bits and pieces of the rest of the world to sort of supplement what point she's making, I think she does a really, really good job of that. And I mean, her movies are not subtle, but I think she manages to get a lot of put a lot in there just by how she builds that world around whatever is actually going on. I don't even remember what he's saying in that scene because it's not the point. No. Like, the point is his gross teeth.
That was the scene where he was telling Demi Moore she no longer had the job. It was just this gross, over the top thing. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, you're being kicked out. You're too old. It was like, it was just such a juxtaposition after his previous scene with that wide shot, which was giving me The Shining vibes.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny towards the end when, okay, not to give anything away, she's in the blue dress and Dennis Quaid's character comes up to her like, "Are you ready?" And he has all the white old executives following him, and so he prances away and they prance behind him. It was
as he's telling her to remember to smile because women are pretty when they smile.
Yes, that line. Yeah, nothing subtle about this movie.
I have to ask a slightly rhetorical question. Does Dennis Quaid know what movie he's in? Because considering the fact that like this a week before this came out, his movie Reagan came out. I'm like, does he not even understand what the substance is? What he signed up to be? Does he think he's the hero of this movie? Like, I don't get it.
I think he knows.
Yeah, I mean, it could just be really great. It could be really great method acting. I don't know.
I mean, the one thing I'll say about his performance is Ray Liotta was originally cast, and it would have been terrific to see Ray Liotta play this because I think he would have also crushed it, and he wouldn't come with the political baggage that Dennis Quaid has, who has been noticeably absent from promoting this film. So, I don't know. All right, yeah, if you haven't seen this, try to see this in theaters because just listening to people shrieking is worth the price of admission alone. But let us move on. Thomas, what is the first movie that you want to talk about here?
Yeah, the first movie I'm going to bring up is one that was a little more divisive than I was expecting. But let's talk about Queer. Queer is... Okay, I've been practicing. Queer is directed by Luca Guadagnino. I don't know if he actually says Nino or not in his name, but that's how I'm pronouncing it here because that's what I practiced before this. Luca Guadagnino. So, the director of Challengers, director of Call Me By Your Name, and stars Daniel Craig and Drew Starkey, and some others that I didn't write down. But essentially, the synopsis that I'll boil it down to is Queer is a hallucinogenic odyssey bathed in desire. Pulled that from the TIFF page. I think that encapsulates the film pretty well. Essentially, you have this like eccentric gay Daniel Craig character who's pretty desperate for desire and connection with someone. When he comes across Drew Starkey's character, and from there, the odyssey ensues, I guess. And I guess the divisiveness, if I'm interpreting correctly, the divisiveness comes in kind of how the film is structured. The first half of the film, I think, is what most people expected from the movie. It takes place in this small town. It's this kind of like will they, won't they relationship thing going on between our two main characters, and a lot of like sexual tension there, and it's also like the first half of the film is literally just chapter one. I spent a lot of chapter one thinking, are there other chapters here, or are we just doing chapter one? But halfway in the film, when chapter two starts, it then begins this journey to find this hallucinogen plant to help Daniel Craig's character become clairvoyant and read minds. And so there's this whole journey that happens in chapter 2 and 3 with these two characters, and I think it was the second half of the film that created the divisiveness, because it does enter this hallucinogenic kind of like psychedelic component of the film, which is very, very different from what's happening in the first half of the film. So I personally really enjoyed this experience. I think it was one that I left wanting to think more about, wanting to have more conversation about, and wanting to see again, to really pick up a lot of the nuances that are happening in this narrative. Originally, it was reported that this film was supposed to be like 3.5-4 hours long, something like that. And someone in the Q&A at the premiere asked about the length of the film, and Luca's response is, well, this is the movie I made, so this is what you're getting. So I don't know if we're ever going to get a director's cut of it, but I think it's very obvious that chapter one seemed like the length that all of the chapters should have been. And I think you can kind of feel the missing components of it in chapters 2 and 3. But I also think that the decision to cut down on the runtime was probably a good one, a smart one, because I think that if this had gone too long, it could have lost interest, even if the subject was kind of interesting. You don't want it to be to overstay its welcome, and I don't. For me, it didn't. I was pretty engaged with it, and really interested in what would happen next in this story. So yeah, like I said, a little bit more divisive than I was expecting, but I landed positively on it. I think Daniel Craig, he deserves all the accolades that he's been getting for his performance, but honestly, in addition to Daniel Craig, I think Drew was a perfect polar opposite from him. And as great as Daniel Craig is in this role by himself, it's really that juxtaposition between him and Drew that helps elevate that performance. And I think Drew deserves a lot more credit than that. In fact, it's really, what's really unfortunate is that Drew accompanied Luca in the Q&A after the premiere screening, and they opened the questioning up for the audience to ask the two of them questions, and the only one who asked Drew a question was Luca.
Oh no.
Like, I think everyone, like, I was certainly like, is anyone gonna ask Drew a question? Like, he did a great job in the film, and there came a point where Luca had to like finish his question with, well, let's ask Drew a question. And so he proceeded to ask Drew a question. Drew gave a very tactful response, and then everyone continued to direct questions to Luca. So it's kind of unfortunate that he is so overshadowed in this movie, obviously Luca being the filmmaker who has a lot of buzz this year between this and Challengers. Daniel Craig, of course, being the lead performer and having this, like, career defining performance, as people are calling it. And then there's Drew, who is just kind of overlooked. So
I didn't care for this movie very much, unfortunately.
Thank you.
I mean, it's okay to be wrong. That's fine.
Am I correct?
This movie rocks.
Yeah, I mean, I thought so. Am I correct though in the two half thing? Am I correct that people who didn't like it got lost in the second half?
I thought chapter one was definitely the most interesting part of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that of the two, the second one was very easily the more interesting one. As soon as chapter 2 came up, I was like, here we go, baby. Here it is.
I was just so fascinated by this community in Mexico that when does this movie take place? The 1940s, I think it is. 50s. And you had this very openly queer community in a small Mexican city where the local side sort of seemed to be catering to this community of sort of tourists, basically, of queer tourists. And I thought that whole world was so fascinating of what we were getting and exploring, and we kind of get to see a little deeper, not just the Daniel Craig stuff, and I thought that was very interesting. And then, I don't know why, but the whole looking for what we later learned to be ayahuasca, that whole stuff just did nothing for me. It wasn't that it was bad or it was boring. It just, I felt zero connection to any of that sort of stuff. And while I thought Daniel Craig is giving a perfectly serviceable performance and I have no complaints about it, I don't think it was, amazing, incredible. Like, I don't think he's the best actor of the year for this performance. And it really seems to be that you're sort of falling in these two different camps of this is one of the greatest films I've ever seen, or it's fine. Like it's too competently made to be bad, and I think that's sort of the best way to put it. It's that, like, the music is excellent, it's shot beautifully. Daniel Craig is great. I think Jason Schwartzman. It took me forever to realize that was Jason Schwartzman, looking more like what's the guy's name? I'm blanking out. Who's in Oppenheimer and Santa Claus?
David Krumholtz?
Yes,
Krumholtz,
looking like David Krumholtz. So much so that I thought that was David Krumholtz for a while. I'd be like, when's Jason Schwartzman show? Oh, wait, no, that is him. But yeah, it just unfortunately did nothing for me, which is a real shame because I do love Luca's movies. I'm a big fan of Naked Lunch, whose the writer is William S. Burroughs, who wrote the book Queer, and it's sort of based on his life. But yeah, just did nothing for me, and so I'm sorry, and I know in advance I'm gonna get a message from Bill Antonio probably calling me homophobic or something like that. But yeah, it just did nothing for me.
I don't think he'd be called homophobic for not liking the movie, because the first chapter, which you were saying you were like, is when they're doing all the queer stuff. The second chapter gets cold as you see that, Daniel Craig may be forcing himself, and it starts going down this interesting avenue, but then it completely shifts once you hit that third chapter, which is the whole drug trip, where I say, it started off as a Sony Classics film and ended in an Ari Aster A24 film. Like, it was just such a, you started one place and went completely off the rails in terms of thematic discussion. I honestly wasn't too enamored by Daniel Craig. I thought he was good. I don't think he was the best performance in the movie. I thought it was Drew Starsky, who was excellent. Let's get his name in the supporting actor race. Like, I don't know. The rest of it just didn't connect. Like, I was vibing with that first 45 minutes or whatever it was. Then it just kind of lost me to one point. I turned to my friend who is gay and I went, this movie's called Queer, right? Because there's nothing queer happening anymore. And he kind of chuckled and ignored me.
I mean, I don't know. I just think that like the movie it's such a beautiful rumination on loneliness. Like you start out in that community, and like even though you've got this whole community of but like is clearly fairly close knit. Everyone, like you said, like the city is basically catering to them at least as much as we see. So like I don't even know how much of what the rest of that city looks like. I think it's Mexico City, isn't it?
Yeah, I
or
think
is
so.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't get very much of Mexico City. We just get this little queer community, and it is like this feels like its own little thing. And Daniel Craig's character Lee just feels like he feels completely outside of this. He's looking for any kind of connection, and like literally any kind of connection that apparently everyone around him seems to be able to find easily. And you get these like interesting little moments where he'll just be sitting at a bar and he'll like briefly turn into like TV static because he doesn't feel like he's actually there. And I found those touches like, oh, what the heck is going on here? And then when it gets into later and he finally does find someone that he wants to connect to, going on that journey really feeds into exactly those themes for me. And so the second part, where it is, I think, getting a bit more explicit about those themes of loneliness and connection, versus it's not explicit at the beginning, but it's a little bit more implied because you do see that community that doesn't clearly battle with those things, or maybe does on paper, but certainly not in the same way that Lee does. I think that when it gets into that second part and it gets a little more interpretive with how it explores loneliness, that really resonated with me. I thought that worked thematically very, very well with what the movie was going for.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to say it's a perfect film. There are components of it that I kind of didn't connect with, or didn't entirely understand. Chapter 2 kind of capitalizes or really highlights the drug addiction that Lee has, and I didn't know where that was going. I still don't know where that was going. It just kind of happened in chapter 2 and then stopped being a problem at some point. So I wasn't entirely sure about that, but I do think that this theme about loneliness and not just wanting to connect with people, but ultimately okay, how do I not spoil things? um Ultimately to be so connected with someone that figuratively or literally become one with that person, right? I think that was interesting, and maybe he took the long way to get there with that chapter 2, and parts of chapter 3 too. I think there are components of chapter 3 that I was just like, man, can we like move on from the scene now? um but yeah, it's the journey, I guess, that I really enjoyed. Like you have everything that we liked about the first half. I think most people are pretty unanimously agree that the first half of the film is really entertaining, really interesting, especially with that sexual tension there, because Drew's character Eugene is so just like it's hard to read him, even as an audience, I'm like, bro, are you in this or not? Like, like, it's not necessarily stringing them along, but also like kind of. And so, you have all of that tension and all that uncertainty, which I think is so subtly like uh incredible to invest myself into and like try to figure out. But then the journey, I think figuratively it makes some interesting pit stops, but ultimately gets to a place that I um, could appreciate in the end. So yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, I thought the actual trip sequence was stunningly shot, which
Hmm.
like Luca's having a an incredible year of just like like I'm gonna do something that you've never seen before with camera and with performances and special effects and I'm gonna blow your mind. And I
Hmm.
think that sort of is right up there with what he did in Challengers in terms of like the final tennis ball sequence sort of thing in terms of like mind-blowing visuals. But it just didn't have enough for me to gravitate to and latch onto. I just didn't have an emotional connection with the movie, which is a real shame because I felt like it had everything going for it for me.
Great. We're going to keep talking about it until you change your mind. This
Sounds
episode will
good.
not continue. I'm kidding. That's fair.
Sounds good. Darren, let's move over to the movie you want to talk about first.
Yeah, so Eden, the new Ron Howard film, like most of his films, it is based on true events. I want to stress it's not necessarily a true story because what actually happens is contested amongst the individuals, but they kind of took the two differing views and kind of created this narrative from them. But it follows a group of settlers on an island in the Galapagos in the 1930s. There's what, 8 people on this island, and you find out very early on, like in the opening title cards, that 4 of them end up dead. And you kind of watch these people, move to this beautiful looking island. And what the story does is basically tears down the human element and kind of boils us down to our most animalistic nature in a thrilling game of survival that is full of manipulation, murder, everything you can think of, it's there. And it was quite a welcomed return from Ron Howard, who I thought hasn't had the strongest run of movies in recent years. And with a cast of Vanessa Kirby, Jude Law, Daniel Bruhl, Sydney Sweeney, and Ana de Armas, there is just something for everyone to enjoy in this movie.
Yeah, this was a movie that wasn't originally going to be on my radar, and then I was like, you know what, I'll go and check this out because I am not a Ron Howard fan. I don't think, honestly, I've never been that big of a fan of him, and it's been quite a long time since he's made something even sort of passable in my opinion. And this doesn't feel like a Ron Howard film, sort of in the slightest to me. But yeah, the performance really carry this film. I think both Ana de Armas and Sydney Sweeney just absolutely steal the show every time Ana de Armas is on screen. You right away you realize who this person is, that you cannot trust anything she says, and despite that you're still hooked onto every word and wondering how she's going to manipulate every situation so that way she comes out on top, and it's so impressive. And then watching sort of Sydney Sweeney being like the one character being like, you realize all of you are insane, right? Like, I'm not, how am I the only person that realizes that you are all literally insane right now? And she's trying to hold it together to keep her family, specifically her children, alive through this
Yeah.
crazy situation. And every once in a while, I think this movie, does a pretty good job of foreshadowing of like, okay, eventually we know that there's going to be a conflict between these two people regarding this. It's not like they're trying to be subtle or hide it. It's like,
No.
okay, we know that this is leading towards us. And so we anticipate it. And then when it does happen, it's always very satisfying watching it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the movie ultimately sort of suffers from pacing issues. I don't know if it's too long or if it's just the way it's edited, but I found myself every once in a while sort of losing interest in sort of, stepping out of enjoyment for a little bit. But that said, I think the performances more than make up for any shortcomings this might have, and with maybe one of, in my opinion, the funniest end title cards about what the
Yes.
aftermath. I don't want to reveal what it is, but like one of the characters, what ends up happening to them later in their life was, one of the funniest moments for me.
Yeah.
And then, did you see this, Thomas?
I did see this.
Okay.
I gotta support my girl Sydney. Local.
She's killing it this year.
She is, fellow Washingtonian. Gotta support our Washingtonians when they break into the industry, especially when they come from Spokane. It's a hard, uh, hard region to get out of and into the spotlight. I'll echo how much I enjoyed the performances. I think all the performances are great. And I do I was actually just looking back through Ron Howard's filmography, and yeah, why does Ron Howard like stand out as someone that I need to like pay attention to his films? I don't care for most of them. But it was certainly much better than I was expecting, and I think what I put in my Twitter reaction after I saw it was so close to being so good for me. So close. I would have liked the script to be a little bit smarter. I think that these characters are great characters that really sets the stage for a lot of like manipulation to happen, and some does, especially towards the end when there is, I guess, a little bit of a twist in how that unfolds. But I think Ana de Armas's character was a bit underused. That luncheon scene, I needed that to happen more often in the film, where it just becomes so apparent who's in charge. um and I don't think that power struggle, I would argue that that's where the pacing and editing issues come in, is that the power struggle wasn't much of a struggle. It was just a lot of speculation. It was a lot of like, this could happen, here's some foreshadowing, and then you get to the end and you get to like the twist that happens towards the end. And I needed that to happen throughout the story. I needed some people to be 2 steps ahead, some people to be 3 steps ahead, and I needed that back and forth a lot more prominent with that power struggle. And I just don't think that it was as clever as it could have been, especially when you have these components to like make up this story. Like, run with it, get crazy with like who's manipulating who should we suspect, who's on which team, because that comes up, like time to choose sides. Like they said that multiple times, and I'm like, I mean, you guys are making it kind of obvious. Like this isn't super complicated here. So yeah, I needed it to be a little more clever, a little smarter. I needed the script writing to be better. But that won't take away from the fact that these actors did a great job. Ana de Armas is the standout here for sure. Her character is just so off the wall bonkers with how delusional she is, which just makes that moment of like of her owning the scene that much better, because it's like, oh, I thought you were just crazy. Turns out you're crazy, and you're in charge right now.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, that's where I landed on it. The cast is great. I just needed better story development.
I don't think I have very much to add. I initially really loved this film. I still, looking back on it, I do think I did really like it. I am hopefully, gonna find time to see it when it actually releases. But the more distance I get from it, I think the more I agree with Thomas. Like it works out. It like plays out. Well, I don't know. I'm not paraphrasing you at this point. These are my thoughts. Like it plays out fine. But yeah, as Thomas was saying, it could have been a little smarter. Like it's the background and the ideas that are there are really solid, and it just needs like a little more polish in some of those areas.
Yeah, and like it's nuts that I think Jude Law gave a terrific performance, and he's just going to be completely overshadowed by everything else about this movie. Which is sort of crazy. I really like the performer that Jude Law has turned into in recent years as he's sort of maturing a bit more. But yeah, even Daniel Bruhl, who like I think gives a very serviceable performance, doesn't really have enough to truly stand out here, especially when you've got both Anna de Armas and Sydney Sweeney being like just such forces of nature every time they're on camera.
I think part of that comes to where the writing came from, because it was based on books written by Vanessa Kirby and Sydney Sweeney's characters. So obviously you're reading a lot more of their internal, the conflicting. I think they were trying not to embellish too much because both families are still alive today. So you're kind of straddling that, how not to piss off the survivors, because the movie does it clearly does pick a side.
Yeah.
But there's real people at stake. So the thing is, apart from those two books, no one really knows what happens.
Yeah.
That's
the thing, because you said it's like I think it's 8 people on an island at a time when
they're the only 8 on the island. They're
Yeah,
literally
quite
all
literally.
it is. So bodies are being found by the government after everything goes down, and you're just taking the words of the people who survived.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Man, if it could just a little bit more sinister. Oh, it could have been so good.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's
Yeah.
it. Maybe there needed to be a bit more mystery to it.
Like,
because
had
they
we
do
not known where it was ending, I think that would have, made it feel that bit more sinister. But it was playing a different game. It was, okay, we're telling you where it ends. Now you have to start figuring out who it is. Is they're kind of doing a shell game, going, where's the ball? Who's going to drop first? Versus, oh my gosh, someone just dropped dead.
Yeah. And honestly, if I was in that situation, not that I am a violent person, but I have a feeling that acts of violence would have happened a whole lot sooner. These people put up with a lot of bullshit.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I don't think this is a spoiler because it's just. Oh, I'm sorry for cutting you off.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. I don't think this is a spoiler because it's literally in the opening title card. I think that it, especially hearing you guys talk about it, I think it's a big mistake to end the opening title card with this is based on the accounts of the survivors. It's obviously based on the accounts of the survivors if it's a real story. You don't have to add that part.
Yeah. And
the only thing that adding that part does is tell us that there are survivors, which means necessarily there are people who died. So like, if you literally just omit that one line, it's already implied, and it doesn't make the entire movie a million times better, but it's like one small subtle change you can make that does improve it a little bit.
Well, if you need any encouragements or any selling points to go see this film, there is a point where Jude Law hangs dong. So
there is more nudity in this movie than queer. I'm just going to say
that's actually probably true.
It's true. Yeah, I don't know how it's possible that haggard Jude Law with no teeth is able to still be that much of a sex symbol. Like,
seriously,
how
bro,
does he do that?
bro walked into frame confident.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a power move, and the power move worked.
Yeah.
Yes. Ron Howard said, "Hey Jude, can you do a solid for this shot?" And he said, "Bet."
Great, I'm already naked. Let's do this.
Let's go.
All right. This is a movie where I'm so curious to hear what people's reactions are, because I think it is going to vary wildly. Another one coming up, Thomas, your next movie, is also one that I'm curious about to hear people's reactions. But before we get there, Jeff, let's segue into your next film.
All right, so this is going to be the first movie that I watched on the ground at TIFF. This was my 9 a.m. on Thursday. This is the new David Cronenberg film, The Shrouds, which I really liked. And the further I get from it, the more I like it. It's one that really grows on me. So The Shrouds, it centers on a tech billionaire named Karsh who develops high-tech death shrouds that let people watch their loved ones decay. As a proof of concept, and it's probably actually more than a proof of concept because he's clearly already rich from this technology, he has a whole graveyard that he basically sponsors in Toronto. I mean, sponsors might even be like might not even be a generous enough word. It's just his graveyard. And he's looking to branch out. In particular, he's looking at a couple of different places. Like I think Reykjavik is one of them, but Budapest is the one that becomes viable. He's like, I'm going to branch out to Budapest. We're going to have a my company is going to build a graveyard there. But one night, his graveyard is vandalized, including taking many of the shrouds offline, including the one that houses his wife. Um, and as he investigates who could have done the vandalism while still trying to close that Budapest deal, he starts to draw connections, including secret societies, evil doctors, potentially even a mole in his company, all centered around his wife. This is a movie that I really liked because this is not going to sell it very well, but I really like movies that are unsatisfying and that can like really commit to being unsatisfying. And I don't think that most movies can do that. Even when I get like an unsatisfying ending, it's one that you think about. It's one that actually does sort of resolve the plot. It's just like a weird twist that you weren't expecting, and you got to think about it a little bit. This one. David Cronenberg sets up a lot of things and does not resolve them. And like that's part of the point, because I think that this movie is a really beautiful movie about grief, and specifically like all of the weird thoughts that grief makes you have. In this movie has a lot of conspiracy theory stuff, as people like to put it, and is accurate to describe it that way. But like over the course of the movie, he sort of discovers all these different conspiracies that all basically a bunch of people that are out to get him specifically for some reason, and they all center around his wife, who has died, and who was clearly the most important person in his life, and who, even though he says he's over her or like he's done grieving her, he clearly is not. He's clearly still grieving her. And so when all of these conspiracies come up and they all center around his wife, it makes him and his wife feel much more important than they maybe actually were, in a way that he can like deal with. And I haven't seen a movie actually tackle conspiracy theories like that, because I don't know how close you guys are to any people in your lives who get really deep into conspiracy rabbit holes. But in my experience, the reason that people do that is because they want to feel a little more important about themselves and their role in the world. And if you're the only person that knows about some secret society, that makes you an important person. And I think that this movie manages to communicate that while also sort of making it clear to the audience that no, he's not that important. He's just sort of making stuff up as he goes along and trying to feel bigger than he is. And I thought that this movie was really beautiful for that. I thought that I've never seen grief tackled in that way in a movie before. And it's definitely a divisive one, I think, because it's not, like I said, it is not a satisfying movie. It's very unsatisfying, probably deliberately so. At the very end, when this movie ends, it just kind of peters out. And that doesn't feel right when you're watching a movie, for the end to just be like on to the next scene, but there is no next scene. So I kind of deviated from my notes here. I wrote up a whole big long spiel about this movie, and then I just kind of spoke from the heart, which I think is part of the beauty of this movie. It makes you sort of, it gets really deep into how you specifically engage with it. And this is how I engaged with this movie.
Damn, Jeff, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I feel bad for missing it now.
I know. I actually dropped it off my schedule. I should have talked to you sooner.
I will be a counterpoint in, well, that was incredibly beautiful. I did not watch the same movie Jeff did. This was my most anticipated movie of the whole festival. We were sitting next to each other for this screening, and it just did not work for me in the slightest. I've loved recent Cronenberg too, so it's not even like I'm a hater of his newer stuff. The conspiracy angle stuff just does not work at all, and anything sort of interesting it has going in, the first hour or so, as Jeff says, there's not a very satisfying conclusion to a lot of it, which is a real shame, because I really wish that there was a bit more of a satisfying conclusion, or at least more of an exploration into the things that they are trying to explore. All the stuff about grief I thought is fantastic. There's some really terrifying sequences with you've got Diane Kruger, who is in a dual role playing twin sisters. So it is Vincent Cassel's both dead wife and his sister-in-law, who is still alive. And we get to sort of see hallucinations, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it, of his deceased wife, and those are some absolutely terrifying ways of portraying grief in how that lives with you, even though you think time has healed these wounds. There's some really just gut-wrenching stuff going on there. Unfortunately, the more into the conspiracy side it gets, the worse this movie gets, in my opinion. And frankly, I think Guy Pearce is completely miscast as the twin sister's ex-husband. So he's Diane Kruger, who the alive Diane Kruger, her ex-husband, who is also Vincent Cassel's security expert, basically. And when they're using him to try to figure out who's doing this hacking and who is behind the vandalism and all that sort of stuff, it just gets too off the rails for me, and none of it is very satisfying, unfortunately.
I'm really glad that you clarified that, because I remember we talked very briefly about this movie afterwards, and I had kind of told you not exactly that, but a little bit about my thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
And you had said the conspiracy stuff doesn't work for you, but the grief stuff does. And that was always really confusing for me, because to me, those two are completely inseparable. To me, the conspiracy theory stuff is the grief stuff. Him grieving is him coming up with all these reasons that his wife was actually the best person ever for the entire world, not just for him, and that anyone in the world who doesn't think so, or wanted to bring her down, is now trying to bring him down. So to me, that was him grieving, and I appreciate you pointing out the differences that you saw there, because to me, those are inseparable. Like, this is the conspiracy theories are the grief in this movie.
Okay, so y'all need to watch this movie again, and I want to hear the commentary between you
Yeah.
two. I need Mystery Science Theater on this one. Like,
Yeah.
this is so interesting how differently you guys feel about the same screening you went to.
Yeah, I think Vincent Cassel does a very good job basically playing David Cronenberg. It's been a while since I've sort of looked up the background, but I'm pretty sure David Cronenberg's first wife did pass away early on in his career, and the fact that Vincent Cassel looks identical to David Cronenberg in this movie, there is no illusion to who he is playing. And so I think that stuff is very fascinating in working through his grief and his trauma and how he feels about that, especially as he since has remarried. And we do get these sequences of him trying to date after his wife's passing, and there's a couple different romantic storylines that are going on. So I think all that stuff is very interesting, and done in a very Cronenbergian way. Just the more layers he tries to add to this story, the less interested I got into it, unfortunately.
One thing I have heard about this movie, I just heard it sort of from people ambiently as I was walking around and in the screening of this. Apparently, David Cronenberg wrote a novel that this movie draws heavily from. Now, I tried to see if this was just based on his novel, and I can't actually find any evidence that his novel is the same story in any way, shape, or form. But he did write a novel in 2005 that apparently has a lot of similarities. And a lot of people were saying that having read the novel did affect their enjoyment of the film. Like they saw a lot of similarities there, which is interesting. But I didn't know about that. And like, if you look up The Shroud's novel, there's no results, because this is not based on that novel. Apparently it's just something he's kind of been working through, I'm going to assume, since his first wife died, because again, this is, as you said, like a very, well, I hope this is what you said, this is like a very personal movie for him about that experience. Yeah.
This is, there's several movies on this list that we're talking about today that I just want to hear what other people think about it. And I loved hearing Jeff's interpretation of it. And I don't think it won't change my opinion the way I felt about it, but I really love hearing how Jeff felt about it and how it affected him and why he thinks it works so well for him. And I think that's fascinating. And if the two of you ever see the film, I would love to hear your thoughts on it as well, because I think it's just one of those movies that you just kind of want to hear people talk about, even if you're not on board with it.
It's also very funny. Like,
it is.
In a very like, in kind of a very cringe way. I've heard people call it a big budget Neil Breen movie, and like, that's not wrong, actually. which maybe that doesn't sell it to you guys specifically, but I know that a couple of my friends would be like, okay, now I have to see this.
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely one. The more people see it, the more I want to hear about it. So I'm very curious about it. But yeah, because neither of you have seen it, I'm going to sort of segue into our next film, which is Saturday Night, which is the latest Jason Reitman film, and it chronicles I believe it's about 2 hours leading up to the very first episode of Saturday Night Live, and it's a sort of behind the scenes look of how the show was being made and how it got to air. And so it's more or less, I don't want to call it a biopic because biopic usually implies that it's about a singular person, but it's sort of like a historical drama, basically about Lorne Michaels and company. And so we get the entire original SNL cast. There were 7 of them. So we've got like John Belushi and Chevy Chase and Gilda Radner and all these iconic people from Saturday Night Live lore, along with everyone else. So it mostly focuses on the production side of things, where you've got like the sort of the head writers and the producers and the network executives all kind of trying to figure out what is this show, because that's the one thing Lorne Michaels is asked a lot in this movie is, well, what is the show? What is SNL? And he has a hard time trying to describe it in ways that make sense, because to everyone, SNL is something completely different to them. And Gabriel LaBelle, who people will know from playing young Steven Spielberg in The Fabelmans, plays Lorne Michaels here. And this is just an absolutely stacked cast. Like, I don't even know if I can go through all the names because there's just so many of them. But this movie is absolutely hilarious. It's also very anxiety-inducing at times, too, because we've got this great score from John Batiste, which basically uses a ticking time clock to let us know how close we are to 11:30, which is when SNL is supposed to air. And sort of the main conflict is at this time, NBC is also airing reruns of the Johnny Carson show, and the NBC executive, David Tebbutt, who is played by Willem Dafoe, has to decide, is he going to play Saturday Night Live or is he going to show a rerun of Johnny Carson? And that's sort of the main conflict that's going on behind the scenes. But Darren, Thomas, and I were all seated next to each other in the press screening for this. And honestly, I think we were laughing the hardest out of everyone in the movie.
Don't even get me started. Press, y'all need to turn up, okay? Like, come on, guys. We can have a good time, all right? I know a lot of you are working, but like, it's Saturday morning. We're watching Saturday Night. Let's do this. I digress, man.
I feel like all the fun ones were at Nora at the exact same time, having that experience that we were having in Saturday Night.
Probably,
maybe. Yeah, because this is, in my opinion, one of probably the funniest movie of the year so far, and one of the funniest movies in the last few years. Just absolutely incredible. Spot on casting for all of the SNL players. And then you've got like a few people who, if you know your SNL history, are big figures, just absolutely crushing their roles. I think for me, the biggest standouts were probably Corey Michael Smith, who is playing Chevy Chase, and Dylan O'Brien as Dan Aykroyd were probably the two of the funniest for me. I think if I was to give one criticism, I talked about it in my review, is the women in this film don't have very much to do. And I'm talking about Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin, and Lorraine Newman. Their characters don't have as much of an arc, which is definitely a bit disappointing, but there's like 30 people who have an arc in this movie. So unfortunately, some people have to suffer. It's just unfortunate that it's the female characters that suffer. But Thomas, as someone who is right up there as being the number one cheerleader for this movie, please tell us your thoughts.
This was my number one film of the festival. This kind of film is what I go to festivals for. It was just such a fun time. I don't know how else to put it. I think I'm going to echo everything that you said. With the cast, there's just some laugh out loud funny moments here. I can't wait to see how the public responds to this film. I do have a couple criticisms. And I think I would have personally preferred if they had stuck closer to the minute by minute structure of the film. It obviously takes place over 90 minutes, but the film is 115 minutes or something like that. So like there's some liberty taken with the time, and I think that shows towards the end before you get to the climax of the film, when the pace kind of slows down, and it's like you guys are fitting a lot into a very small, what's supposed to be a very small time frame.
Yeah.
And so that kind of pulled me out of the film just a little bit, but the rest of it is so anxiety inducing. Like it does such a great job of like going through sequences and then reminding you what time it is, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is happening so fast. There's so much going on, there's so much chaos. And it's so funny. I think my favorite character was probably J.K. Simmons. Man,
Oh, he's so good. Oh my
Oh
God.
yes.
he has some moments in this movie that are just audacious, and I loved it. He just owned
Yeah.
it, right? So yeah, I don't know how else to sell this film, except that, I mean, one of the things that I struggle when I'm explaining this movie to people is like, I'll say like, oh yeah, it's about the 90 minutes leading up to the first episode of Saturday Night, and then people say, oh, it's a documentary. No, it's not it's a
Yes,
drama.
I got that too.
Right, it's not a documentary, not a biopic, as you said, Dakota. It's really it's a dramatization of
Yeah.
those 90 minutes, and so I try to remember to clarify that. The other thing that I'll also say on the marketing side of this film is, I think I just watched the trailer last night when I saw The Substance, and the trailer just gives way too much away. Don't watch the trailer.
Yeah. Yep.
It spells out beat by beat what happened. It's just not necessary to watch the trailer. You know what it's about. The cast, and I'm telling you, it is funny. Just on October 11th, when it goes to theaters, just go see it with an audience, hopefully a big crowd, because I think it's really one to engage with. Once again, I thought this should have been in the People's Choice conversation. It's a shame that it wasn't. I could see this as a Best Picture nominee, um, but I guess that's just how the chips fell. And yeah, I do have a ticket to see this on Saturday night in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I'm so stoked to see it with the public audience on a Saturday night. I know that anyone who's going to the screening is seeking this movie out, because either they're fans of SNL, or just because they want to watch a Saturday night live movie on Saturday night. That was a big miss on TIFF's part. I can't believe they didn't have a Saturday night screening of Saturday Night.
Right.
They were all Saturday morning screenings. I'm not entirely sure who was in charge
And
of
the
that.
premiere was Tuesday night. It was like,
Yeah, what's going on, guys?
Yeah.
Like, this should have better planning.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, loved this film. I can't wait to see it again. And it's so fitting that this movie is coming out around SNL's 50th season. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And what about you, Darren?
well, you heard me laughing at that screening. I loved it. It was my number 2 of the festival. It was such a blast. I think the word I've used to describe it, it's a comedic thriller. It is very funny, but you're also like that panic inducing of like whiplash. You're like, we know they obviously pull it off because SNL's been running for 50 seasons, but you have that moment where you're like, oh crap, like they almost didn't make it. Like we almost never had this movie because it never became a thing. The casting is great. I completely agree with Corey Michael Smith and Dylan O'Brien. The others stand out for me because every scene he had were some of the best lines and jokes in the movie. Was Tommy Dewey as the writer, Michael Donahue. Oh my gosh, this watching him go back and forth with the lady from the studio trying to standards writer. Oh my gosh, just madness. Oh. Yeah, no.
And that final punchline is great, where like that's the thing with comedies, you don't want to reveal too many of these lines, but like we could definitely go quote for quote here. But the final punchline of the story he tells is just so terrific.
The best joke of the movie. Oh my god. I still can't believe they did that, but they did.
It's so great.
But yeah, no, go see it. See it for a big crowd. Go on Saturday night. You will not be disappointed. Even if you're not a big movie person, it's just a fun movie that everyone's going to enjoy.
Also, even if you're not a big Saturday Night Live fan, I know that there's a lot of jokes for the deep cut Saturday Night Live, fans, super fans, and they're going to enjoy the references that happen in the film. But even if you're not into Saturday Night Live like that, like there's still so much to enjoy about this movie. So
Yeah. Jeff, I believe you unfortunately were not able to catch it. Is that correct?
No, I caught it.
Oh, did you?
I
Okay.
thought that I really liked Corey Michael Smith and J.K. Simmons. They actually get one scene together where one of the things that I most know Chevy Chase for is for being one of the world's most famous assholes, and to see him get out assholed by Milton Berle is very fun. It's like a very fun character moment for the two of them.
so great.
Yeah. And I think the fact that Chevy Chase is basically the biggest persona non grata in the SNL world, I think they do him a little bit dirty in this movie, where everyone has their demons, and they kind of talk a little bit about John Belushi's, drug history, which unfortunately took him from us too soon, and I think they only kind of lay into that a little bit because he passed away and isn't here anymore. But Chevy Chase is really the only one that they really dig into. And I know they all have their demons. It would have been a bit nicer to be a bit more egalitarian with doling out their true thoughts on who these people are.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is quite as stark a character assassination as the characterization of Jim Henson here, though, because, like, they hate Jim Henson, and thanks to this movie, I hate Nicholas Braun. I think that his interpretation of Jim Henson is, like, one of the most insulting performances I've seen. It's so bad, and I really wish that anyone cared about this guy, because I've seen this movie. This movie gave like an awful Jim Henson, and I just recently saw a Ron Howard documentary where, in my opinion, the message of that documentary is that Disney was actually super cool to Jim Henson, and he loved them a lot. So that's not accurate. And so I don't know why people seem to dislike Jim Henson, but I really wish people didn't. And that's my biggest gripe with this movie. Anyway,
I mean, like, I get it in the sense of you have all these counterculture people who were interested in doing as much cocaine as they could, and were all super narcissistic. And so in that sense, and from what I gathered, they weren't, other than Lauren, none of them were actually thrilled that he was involved.
Sure, but the thing is, you're describing all of them as counterculture, and you're not describing Jim Henson as counterculture. And that's why I'm saying this is a character assassination of him, because Jim Henson is like the most transgressive of any of these people. Not the most cocaine using, for sure, but the most transgressive of any of these people. And it portrays him as this straight-laced, uptight wad, basically. And like, he'll come in and he won't swear, and he's this very soft-spoken guy, and he's like, why'd you put my Muppets in compromising positions? And it's like, that's not Jim Henson. Like, of course it is very obvious and very well known that Jim Henson did not like get along with this particular group at that time. Like, they clashed at the very least, and that's fair, and you can portray that. But I think that the way they do that is like, he was such a square, we were all so cool. And it's just not, I don't believe it. I don't buy that.
Fair. It wasn't an issue that bothered me. I enjoyed that aspect. Did you like Nicholas Braun's performance as Andy Kaufman, though?
No, I thought it was a caricature. Like, I don't think that he cared. I don't think that, I think that he did impressions of two people that they decided not to hire someone to actually play. So I did not like Nicholas Braun in this. It's like, I guess it's a little easier to do an impression of Andy Kaufman and get away with it, because all he has to do is do the Mighty Mouse thing. And as long as he nails that joke, then great. I didn't like the rest of his performance as Andy Kaufman, but it's like 3 minutes out of the movie outside of that. Yeah. So like, whatever.
It's very brief.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts from anyone else on this movie before we move on? No? All right.
I do apologize for killing the vibe a bit. I had very strong feelings about this movie, which I talked about in my podcast, so I won't sour the vibe more here, but this was not in my top movies of the festival. I will say that much.
Fair enough. All right, well, Thomas, let's go back to you with the next film you want to talk about.
This is going to be an interesting one.
This
is gonna be
I
an
was saying
interesting
next to Thomas, so I know where he's going.
So the one I'm gonna talk about, my second film is The Assessment. I don't know if I'm gonna pronounce her name right, but it's directed by Fleur Fortune. And the screenplay is written by Mr. and Mrs. and Mr. Thomas. Not sure what that necessarily means. And John Donnelly. And of course, stars Elizabeth Olsen, Alicia Vikander, and Himesh Patel. And essentially, the synopsis just says, set in a future world destroyed by climate change, a couple must pass an assessment before they're allowed to have a child in this sci-fi thriller. And off the bat, like, great performances. Let's just start there. Excellent performances in this film, particularly from Elizabeth Olsen, and particularly from Alicia Vikander. Yeah,
her best since Ex Machina, like, no question.
Just fantastic. I mean, you just kind of have to see it to understand what we're talking about, but really great performances here. I also found the plot to be very gripping. There's moments in this film that are just thrilling in a very anxiety inducing way. And yeah, again, I'm trying not to spoil too much, because one of the benefits to having seen this at TIFF was going into it blind. It was on my radar and I wanted to see it, but I didn't originally have it on my schedule. And then the first few screenings happened and people were saying that it is a fantastic film. And so I rearranged my schedule to make sure that I caught one of the screenings, and was very happy that I did so. And so, like I said at the top of this is I tend to call this movie birth control for new or potential parents.
Yeah.
Just the way that it tackles the realities of parenthood is so interesting. I'm not a parent, so I can't necessarily relate to how accurate it is, but it seems like there's some nuggets of truth to what parents have to go through with raising a kid. And that's, I mean, partially, I can't say that, I can't spoil it. Anyway, it's a really good movie, although there are aspects of the film that I wish that I would like to have more conversations about. The movie really comes from like, it's about a couple who want to be parents, but I really think the movie hyper focuses on Elizabeth Olsen's side of that story. It definitely comes from the mother side of things a lot more than the father side, and I think the conclusion kind of emphasizes that a lot. And it would be interesting to have conversations about this film from the father's side of the story. Yeah, I can't say that either. Okay, I guess I'm gonna wrap it up here. When we finish this talk, there's things about this movie that I'd love to have conversations about, and I think that's my big takeaway here. It's a conversation piece. This is something that you walk away from having conversations about, talking about, maybe even debating about, the challenges of parenthood, and what that means in practice. So.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this film. I think you're spot on with the highlight being the performances of Vikander and Olsen. The two of them are terrific, and this movie goes to some really weird places that, like, you can sort of extrapolate of, like, this idea of, like, oh, okay, yeah, you've got someone who's seeing your fitness to be a parent, whether or not you're going to be a parent, and they're going to put you through some tests, and you're like, okay, I can kind of see where maybe this goes, but, like, it, like, goes to some, like, really crazy extremes that I was not expecting. And I think a really interesting thing, it's a bit of a soft sci-fi film, and I think one really interesting aspect that we only get a couple nuggets throughout, but I think are probably some of the most important little nuggets we get, is everyone in this movie is a lot older than they look. This world that they live in, I think, is some sort of a dome covering where they live to prevent some sort of toxins. I don't know. We're not really told much about the backstory of what happened to Earth. And they take this drug that basically allows them to keep living. And if they stop taking it, they're going to age at their regular way people age. And so we get this, we don't really, we know that they're taking this drug, but we don't really get a ton of information about it until there's a dinner party scene and we are introduced to the Minnie Driver character, and we learn that she's, I think, supposed to be like 160 or something like that. I can't remember what it is. And as soon as we learn that information, it suddenly becomes, well, how old is everyone else here? And so that becomes so much more interesting, especially when we learn about Hamish Patel's previous relationship and things like that. Like, oh, this wasn't, maybe some like university, high school love that they just ended up breaking up and then he moved on to Elizabeth Olsen. No, they were probably together for decades before he's now with Elizabeth Olsen, and they've now probably been together for decades. And sort of once we get that little kernel, I think that unlocks a whole bunch of really interesting stuff, to the point when we get the sort of the final shot. I think is an absolutely beautiful one, and sort of broke my heart in how beautiful it was. I really enjoyed this film, and I don't know how much of an audience this movie is going to get because it might be too weird for people, but it's one that I hope that people discover.
I don't know if it's too weird. I think it helps that it's coming out on a streaming platform. So I think lots of people will see it on Prime Video when it eventually hits there. Because, yes, the premise and what it's exploring is a little weird, but without getting into spoilers of what actually goes down in the movie, it's got a lot of fun elements that people are going to get into, even if they aren't so on board with the weirder stuff going on. Echoing what you both said, the performances are great. I really wish this was getting a theatrical release because it was fun with a big crowd, especially when you have that one person at that one pivotal moment scream out mid-movie, "That bitch." Thank you, Thomas. And everyone started laughing and applauding mid-movie. Like, that was the type of the tension in the room, and you just cracked it, and everyone lost their minds.
Yeah, that was a moment.
People are walking out going, "Someone said that." We're like, "Yeah, that was him."
That was me.
Yeah,
and it was true.
It was true. It was. No, but beyond like what we've talked about, the other thing that really struck me with the movie is it's all set in one location at Elizabeth Olsen and Hamish Patel's housing, I say complex. They had a house, they had a greenhouse, kind of this wide open space. But even though it was, one shot, the cinematography really kind of brought to life, kind of giving a life to this location that was beyond just, this one room they're in, while also making it feeling very claustrophobic. Like there was this pressure weighing down on everyone in that. It was kind of captured by this narrowness of the view, which I thought just enhanced everything else that was going on in the film.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting, like 1984-esque, dystopian subplot going on. As far as like, oh, are you for the government or against the government, and that sort of stuff, I thought was very interesting. I think they could have explored that maybe a little bit more, but it was just, it added a nice little layer to it all.
Yeah, nice world building here. But I think it's a very I do agree that I enjoyed the theatrical experience, but I do also like the accessibility of this film going to a streaming service, because I think this is coming out at a very timely point where there's a generation of people who are not as invested into having kids, and I think that that's a conversation that kind of kicks up in the dinner scene, where it's like, I mean, in this particular situation, it doesn't, there's arguments for why having kids doesn't make sense. But, there's this back and forth between the logical reasoning for or against having kids versus the emotional reason. And I think, I don't know, maybe the movie could have explored that more, but I think it really leaves open the question for people to explore themselves and to apply to their own lives. Like, is it, how are you approaching the idea of having kids or not, if you are potential new parents? Is it logical, is it emotional, is it relevant? which one you're making the decision. Like, there's a lot of conversation that can happen because of this film, that is very um, relevant to the current mentality of like kids, and whether that's conducive for lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, did you see this one?
I unfortunately didn't. This is one I tried to find room for very late into the festival because it was recommended to me by everyone who saw it, who I knew, but unfortunately I couldn't find room for it. I do. I'm. You guys are making me more interested in seeing it. I was already very intrigued, and now I'm excited, especially learning that it will be something I can just watch on Prime Video. Although if it does do a small theatrical release, maybe I'll see if I can make it out. But I just wanted to share this one without. I was just looking through the synopsis on Wikipedia, and I just want to share the last sentence of it. It's no spoilers or anything, but it's very, very funny. They will either get a passing grade or not, and "not" is like in italics.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's how I describe the movie, I guess.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, let us move on to the last movie we want to talk about, and that's yours, Darren.
Yes. So, Heretic, the latest A24. I guess we can call it a horror movie. It's rooted within the horror genre, but like everything A24, it's not exactly what you expect going in. The film is directed by, hold on, I'm gonna get their names right, but Scott Beck and Brian Woods, who were the writers of the first Quiet Place film. They did Haunt. So they've done kind of horror in different subgenres, and here they're kind of moving into, it's a bit more of a chamber piece horror. It follows two young Mormon girls out spreading the word, trying to sign people up for Mormonism, and they come across the house of Hugh Grant's character, and he, invites them in after saying, "Oh yeah, it's all good. My wife is in the kitchen baking pie," and they start having this conversation about not just Mormonism, but kind of religion as a whole, where you get the sense that there's this battle of the minds going on. And then the film takes a very dark turn where they discover that there is no way for them to leave his house. Mm-hmm. And I won't say much more because the film, it does play out to some extent of what you expect going in, having seen the trailer and a brief glimpse of what is to come. But what actually unfolds was way more intellectually challenging than I ever would have expected from this film. There were some very good jump scares, but that is not the emphasis of the film. It's all about discussions regarding religion and faith and what it means to have faith. And it was kind of really engrossing watching this all play out on screen. And I think the biggest reason for that was Hugh Grant's performance, which I'm going to say it, I think it was the performance of his career. He was absolutely incredible. We've seen him in villain roles in recent years, but he was the darkest and most disturbing you've ever seen him, as far away as you could get from his rom-com days and Notting Hill and all those cheesy films that we love him for. And it was just one performance that made my skin absolutely crawl.
Yeah, this was the level of smartness I needed out of the script for Eden. Because I actually almost skipped this movie. I wasn't sure what to expect from it. There were only a couple screenings and I had other priorities. In fact, I almost skipped it for the assessment. I was literally sitting in the assessment that conflicted with the screening, and I realized, okay, I can go to the assessment tomorrow. Let me go ahead and hop over to the Heretic Theater, and I did, and I'm so happy that I did. I would have been very upset if I missed this movie at TIFF, because it's such a clever script. I get very apprehensive when a film is building up to an answer, because it's hard to outsmart the audience. We figure out where you're going with things, with all the build up. Like we're logical enough to piece things together. And so a lot of times when these movies have this big question that they're like building up to, you kind of figured out what the answer is, and maybe you will in this movie. But I think the journey to getting there was so intellectually stimulating for me. These are like very interesting conversations that I think people should be having, the challenging, the back and forth. This is one of those movies where the characters are trying to be one step ahead of each other, and the power struggle in that is very evident throughout the whole film. And so the script is smart in that way. But when they do get to the answer, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. That was a really good thing to build up to. And I think the payoff when they get to the answer and the answer is revealed, it's like, yeah, that is a real that was perfectly executed in my mind. And it just made so much sense. And so it's such a, for me, it was such a satisfying film to watch, and be engrossed with, to be thrilled by. It's definitely, it has its creepy moments. There's really again, anxiety. I guess this is just
Yeah.
what we went to TIFF for, was anxiety. Some very anxiety driven moments as you're trying, like, figuring out, you know, the situation that these girls are in, and as the you know, the clues are revealed and new information, and while all this is happening, this ongoing conversation about the merits of religion, um and it really, and I think where it lands on that in the end is also, again, a really good place to end. I think that it opens opportunity for further conversation after the film.
Mhm.
uh and I couldn't have asked for anything more in this film. I was very, very happy with it.
I wrote a review of this that I am personally very proud of, which will go up eventually, I'm sure, somewhere. But I really loved this film. I thought that, like, I mean, it really is just, it's my exact kind of thing. It's just like a bunch of philosophical conversations back and forth. And they're really smart philosophical conversations. Like, I think this movie is essentially like, uh, in the course of an hour and a half, it's just an intro to world religions class, but it's like done very well. And intro to world religions, you know, I say intro, but like that's still like that's still a full class that you have to go to and
Mhm.
intellectually engage with. So I do watch like a lot of like videos and discussions and stuff of people deconstructing their faith. And so this, you know, I guess there's nothing new in this movie for me, but I like the way that it went about it, and it did sort of talk about like deconstructing one's faith in a really interesting way. And it specifically gave like it gave two different sides to it. I think that the way this movie is put together, it has like two very clear different sides of an argument, and it has one person in the middle who kind of has to choose. I don't know how better to say that. It's just like you feel as the audience like you are kind of like you're kind of having to pick a side and like getting a fully dialectic experience here. Um, and I really like those conversations. I think this movie does that really well. And I hope it doesn't give too much away. Hopefully it's been sort of implied at this point anyway, but there's this one really funny running bit in it where, you know, right when he lets them in, he says, "Oh yeah, my wife is just inside." And then they sit down, and then he goes, "My wife is just in the other room." And then they go to another room, and he goes, "My wife is just in the other room." And at one point he's about to go into another room, and he says, "So I'm about to go into this room and see my wife. But at this point, I want you to ask yourselves, do you believe me when I say my wife is in this other room? Despite all the evidence to the contrary, do you believe me?" And like,
Yeah.
it's actually, I mean, I say that, and that's actually like, that's punctuating one of his points. It's like such a well written
Yeah.
movie, and it's got such well written arguments in it that like it's there's a point where he makes some of the most absurd claims, and you just kind of go along with it because up until that point he's built his argument so well, and he's Hugh Grant, so he's
And a
delivering
sweater. It's all, you can't not
Yeah.
trust him. Yeah.
Right.
I went to the second screening of this, so there's a Q&A afterwards, and Hugh Grant said, "I'm in my freak show era." So
Yeah.
yeah, this is a really good one. I'm very happy with this one, and I'm hoping that I get the chance to see it again. It's coming out November 8th,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
will try and be catching it again.
A movie about questioning Mormonism. I think A24 should have took this to Sundance.
Right.
Oh, actually, one interesting thing that I read about this, because I was reading a lot about this for writing my review. One thing that I think they did really well in the casting, Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East haven't had a lot of film roles. I think this isn't their first role or anything, but they are both ex-Mormons. So I think that like
interesting.
when they're able to specifically talk about the tenets of the Mormon faith here, I think that it's really cool that they brought in people who can potentially speak about that from the experience of having been Mormon missionaries.
And the funny thing about that is they spoke about that at the first premiere screening, and that actually wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened. Like they were doing the casting call. It wasn't a criteria. Then they found these two, and they kind of went, "Oh my gosh!" Like they can really. And then they found out that they had that background, so that kind of added a layer of honesty to their performance. Like they weren't, actors pretending to be Mormons and, doing the caricature that we all think of. They actually were able to embody that. So I thought that was really interesting. It wasn't a casting criteria, but then it played out that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting to learn.
And then also shot here in BC. So that's always good.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Didn't recognize those Squamish Mountains.
I was wondering where it took place because I'm like, this setting looks familiar, but it's not Washington. So,
If it's not clear by now, because I haven't said anything, I haven't seen this movie, so there's nothing I could really add to this conversation other than the fact that I really do want to watch it. And I had read Jeff's first draft of his review, and it was excellent. And I'm very excited to read the second one that'll be going up probably by the time this episode drops.
Yeah, guys, the more I'm thinking about this movie, the more I cannot wait to see it. The twist at the end.
I had the trailer playing. I was at Speaking Movie last night, and the trailer was on, and everyone's like, "Oh, this looks interesting." I'm like, "Oh, none of you are ready for what's coming."
You don't even know.
It was great. I was just sitting there going, "Haha, yes."
Yeah, I mean, this is such a cool thing about going to festivals is being able to get ahead of trailers. And like, I mean, I was watching The Substance last night and just looking at, oh yeah, that's this movie. I saw that, or I saw, and so like, I always enjoy going to festivals to be able to watch films as blindly as possible. Whenever we talk about Anora, that's one where I think the trailer is super misleading about what that film is.
Is it? Okay.
Oh yeah, that trailer makes it look like a Cooper Raiff film. And that is not.
No.
I love the trailer. Like I watched the trailer after I saw the film. The trailer is beautifully cut. It's a gorgeous trailer. It is not what the movie is about. So let me just adjust your expectations there ahead of Biff. But yeah, like all these, like I said, the Saturday Night trailer gives too much away. So like this is perhaps just my plug to anyone who might be more inclined to do this practice is to avoid promotional material before going into a film. My husband is not one of those people. He has to see the trailers. He was supposed to go to The Substance with me last night, but then he watched the trailer. But that's just him. He has to watch trailers before going to movies. I respect it. But yeah, sometimes just going into movies blind is just so satisfying for the experience.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I think we had a great discussion about a bunch of different movies, and hopefully, if you were at TIFF, you liked our discussion. And if you weren't at TIFF, these movies are ones that you now want to check out. So, Jeff, where can people find you, and what are you working on? I know you've been talking about your TIFF wrap-up podcast, which I know isn't up as of the time of this recording, but I imagine that's your next episode then?
That is our next episode, and the way that our schedules tend to work out, if you're listening to this the day it comes out, probably my wrap-up drops tomorrow. Most likely, if I had to guess. So, I just recorded the wrap-up with Pierre yesterday. We talked about... we pretty much just like he picked basically 5 movies from the list that I looked at to focus on, and there was only one movie of overlap with this podcast here. So I will not say what that was, and I will let you guys look forward to listening to that episode, maybe even tomorrow. You can find all of my episodes all of our episodes under Classic Movies Live on Spotify. In the next couple of weeks, we will likely be talking about movies that were at TIFF, just because things are starting to come out. And we have recently started a series called Director Showdown. Our last episode was Todd Field versus Luca Guadagnino, starring with a wonderful guest in Jericho Tadeo. It was a great episode, and I won't spoil any more of it, but you should go and check that out if you enjoy Call Me by Your Name, or if you enjoy In the Bedroom, or either of the other movies by those two directors. And that is where I will stop plugging myself, because I feel like I've plugged quite a bit. So thank you very much again for having me on, Dakota.
Of course, and people can check out your reviews. I'm going to link to them in the show notes, but all of them can be found on ContraZoomPod.com. But Thomas, where can people find you, and where you've been working on?
Yeah, so you can find content from me and my team from TIFF over at thisisforreal.com. For real, of course, spelled FORREEL. My team did such a great job covering the festival. I'm drowning in content that still needs to publish, which is a good problem to have. So still have red carpets publishing, we still have interviews publishing, and reviews still to come as well. So we've covered a lot of the festival. I mentioned already three of my team members got reviews up for The Life of Chuck, so you can go see what they thought on the website. I'll also be covering VIFF along with a few of you guys, so that will be fun to catch some of those films, and I'm going to do a bunch of interviews there as well. And I am kicking up Real Buzzed again, so it's really cool that I got to see so many films at Toronto, because I was able to build a schedule of Real Buzzed episodes to release each week from what I saw in Toronto. So these movies are just kind of like slowly rolling out over the next few months, and I'll be able to get Real Buzzed episodes on a lot of them. So I will definitely be having one for The Wild Robot Saturday night. I also anticipate having Real Buzz episodes for Hold Your Breath, Honora, Conclave, and Heretic. So, and then a bunch more. So anyway, you can find all that at thisisforreal.com.
Amazing. And Darren, what about you? Where can people find you, and what have you been working on?
So right now I'm in, the post-TIFF. Oh crap, I have a ton of reviews to do. I've got 11 published so far of 44 I think I'm going to do. We'll see how far I get. Last year I dropped off around 32 because I was like, I need to stop. So we're working on that. We've got VIFF starting up next week. So there'll be some reviews for that, and probably some overlap with my TIFF stuff, because I'll recap stuff and then write the review after, not going, oh, that was movie number 39 at TIFF. My brain was a little melted by the time I saw Nora, all that good stuff. But you can find all my reviews at moviescenecanada.com or on my social media, Instagram, Darren Movie Reviews.
Amazing. Thank you so much, all three of you. Really appreciate having you guys on. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at ContraZoomPod. Did you see anything at TIFF this year? Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.